Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show, airing in this pre-recorded episode on News Radio 690 KTSM. I am your host, Andrew J. Polk. Thank you for joining us and tuning in however you may be doing so, be it on air, online, live streaming through the free and reliable iHeartRadio app, or joining us over in our social media presentations, including, of course, the places that we are over on Facebook, the El Paso History Radio Show, YouTube, El Paso History TV, and even in some of our partner pages, including Remember in El Paso When. Today is Saturday, February 11th, 2023, and today we are talking about some of the interesting and in-depth music, production, etc., history, and how it's still moving forward here in town a little bit later. So this is, of course, the place where we say Texas history begins in El Paso. Do have a history moment at the top of hour 2 from documentary filmmaker Jackson Polk, talking this week about the history and foundation of Kern Place. So our guest today, and of no relation as far as I'm aware, we are joined here by Rick Kern, and you are the host, producer, everything probably, and, technical guy, all those things for Talk and Rock Radio, which we talk about on the show, but also have just a lot of music production experience, history, involvement yourself here, going back decades.
Yeah, just a few years. I know, folks, I don't look that old, but, I really am.
So not necessarily so you're any of those old phrases that can be used here, but you've had a lot of experience with this going back to, kind of almost the foundations of that kind of era of, rock and roll, kind of the mainstream stuff. There are some very familiar names that we're going to be discussing here today that you either had relationships or involved in the production with, your own bands, of course, here, but also the way that you had kept that going and not just that was a fun era that happened, but even made it a business for a while and now still do remembrances of it and produce it. Again, something that we talk about on the show and mention most every week is talkandrockradio.com, where you kind of put out these parts of these remembrances, also current production, all kind of stuff involving stuff that either you've been involved in and what is still going on and stuff both locally and kind of around the world and the country. So there's a lot we're going to be trying to break down within these couple of hours here.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely. Because, you will do it, again, weekly over talkandrockradio.com. We certainly make mentions of that and bring it up here. But your experience going back to, even your own early days, much more than just early remembrances of those that are still from those eras, you have started your own music experience back at the tender age of 11, right?
Andrew, that's when it basically started for me. I think I picked up drums when I was 11 years old and kind of dabbled with it for a couple of years, in 1963 is when it really happened for me. My dad was part of he was in the Lions Club, the downtown Lions Club, and they had a bowling team, and they would go out on Thursday nights to the Sky Lanes bowling alley out off of Dyer, out in Northeast, and I would jump in my dad's yellow Scout, and we would head out to the Northeast. We lived in the Lower Valley off of North Loop near Tigua, and we would head out to the Northeast, and I would sit there and watch my dad bowl for a while, And the rule was I couldn't leave, go outside of the building. I could go, I could wander around inside and, go to the cafe and stuff like that. So I would watch Dad and for a while, and then I'd wander around. And this was in 1963. I would have been 13 years old. And this particular one that I want to talk about, this particular night, I had met a guy named Mike McGill. And he ended up being a bass player and could sing a little bit. His mom was also a bowler there at Sky Lanes the same night, but on a different team. And so Mike and I would usually hook up and we'd go to the little, diner, little cafe there and get a cherry Coke and some French fries and just talk about bands and stuff, stuff that I liked. And he talked about, the bands that he liked and everything and the music that we liked. And my big thing then was the Ventures and Dick Dale and the Dale Tones, and I would play my drums to the records at home, and that's what I was doing. And then there were a few guys in the neighborhood, we had a little garage band kind of thing happening. But the real magical thing happened to me that one night. I was looking around for Mike, and he wasn't there that particular night, so I went on over to the cafe by myself and sat there and had my French fries and my cherry Coke. And on the way back, I heard this great music. I'm going, my gosh, where's that coming from? And it was actually a little bar there called the Little Dipper Lounge.
Mm.
And so I was just enthralled by what I'm hearing, coming through the door there. Of course, I couldn't go inside, but I stood outside the door and watched this band, and I heard this music, and I can't believe what I'm hearing. This is so good. This was my first live band that I'd ever seen.
Okay.
At 13, and so anyway, the cocktail waitress was very nice. She let me stand there and watch the band, and it was very exciting because not just because the music was so great, but watching the response of the crowd. The crowd was excited. They were. It was music that I'd never heard before, and the crowd was applauding, and they were. I mean, it was almost as fun watching the crowd as it was the band because they were just really into the moment, So anyway, I stood there most of the night just watching these guys play this great music. And so at the end of the night, when my dad was through bowling his like 3 or 4 games, he came over to me and he said, "You want to go inside and watch the band?" I said, "Oh my gosh, yes, let's do it." So we go inside, and there was a table right in front, right by the stage. And I can't believe what I'm hearing, and Dad, he's agreeing with me. He said, "Yeah, they're really good." When they took their break, the members of the Bobby Fuller Four came over to our table, and I met Dalton Powell for the first time, the drummer, and Jim Reese and Randy and Bobby Fuller, and they were so nice, they were just, and I said, "Oh, you guys are so great," and they were just very kind. And anyway, we finished out the night with those guys, and I just loved hearing them, And at the end of the night, I told my dad. He says, how did you like the band, Rick?" And I said, "I love these guys, Dad." I said, "Someday I want to be in a rock and roll band like those guys." So anyway, this is kind of the beginning of my journey of really having a passion for wanting to be in a rock and roll group. Time goes by. The following week, Mike was there, and I told him about the band and how cool they were and everything, and so he got to hear them. And then let's move forward a little bit. I stayed in touch with Mike, and we're about 2 or 3 years later. We're both in high school. He's at Burgess. I'm at Isleta High School, and anyway, we ended up playing in a band together. I don't have any pictures of that band, but what we did do is we formed a band, and we played for some things like Burgess and Bloom and Austin in Action, after game dances, stuff like that. We were a pretty decent band, and things kind of went from there. It was very interesting. And then I think it was 1969, my freshman year at UTEP.
Okay.
And I'm in the vocal music department, and I met a couple of guys that were both musicians, a bass player and a keyboard player. And then myself, I said, "Well, we ought to maybe put a group together, see if we can make this thing work, So we did. And we added a guitar player. And the story about that is that we ended up playing at the Knights Club at the Roadway Inn. We played there 6 nights a week. We were the only band in El Paso that was playing 6 nights a week at that time.
Okay.
It was pretty cool. We bounced between, that's our group right there, the basic sound. And as you can see, for those of you out there that recognize him, yes, that is Jim Reese from the Bobby Fuller Four, standing there right behind me. I'm sitting at the table with Gail, and then there's Dick Greco, and then Jim Reese. But that dream, I forgot to mention that I had a dream that night when I saw that band, and I dreamed about the Bobby Fuller Four, and here we were 5 years later. I have the lead guitar player from that band playing in my band, and he was with us for 3 years. What was really kind of cool is around that same time in 1969, Bobby was killed in 1966 out in L.A. But when the members came back to El Paso, it was pretty interesting because one of our great bands in El Paso was Rod Crosby and the Intruders. And in Rod's band was Dalton Powell playing drums in 1969. In my band, I had Jim Reese from the Bobby Fuller Four playing in my band. So it was kind of interesting there how both bands had two of the members of the Bobby Fuller Four. So it was fun times, man. Great memories.
Absolutely. And if anyone's wondering, we'll play a little bit of music later on for those on our on-air audience. Won't be able to do it because of rights and all those kind of things for our online audience. But these are recognizable tunes. I mean, Bobby Fuller, most, I would argue, famously known for, of course, I Fought the Law. Here, I mean, he had a whole other catalog for him. But in terms of immediate recognition, and I mean, it's still... You still find it around, it being used in different ways, different productions to this day, or even just played on its own as a track with a lot of staying power, I'd argue, in here. And so them being and coming out of this area, I mean, there's always been a history of local music production, of notable talents that have either come out of here and made it big elsewhere or just been pervasive around town. And so that's kind of, in an encapsulation, a lot of what you're both on stage and then kind of even now to this day career has been about cataloging that, being a part of it, and continuing on those remembrances. I mean, one of the things that you had actually for the Border Legends tour, which people may also be very familiar with you from, and your production of that, music and friendships will always be remembered. So it's those relationships that you really focus on.
Exactly. Yeah. It was tremendous times, you know, and a lot of great relationships, a lot of reunions and things that have taken place through the years. You know, right after in that 69 period, you know, actually a few years before that, 2 or 3 years, I had played in a couple of other bands. There was one called the West Hampton Barge, which was a local popular band. I was not the original drummer. I was the last drummer. The first drummer was Jack Barrett. And then I kind of took over the drumming towards the end of the West Hampton Barge. And then I played with another group called the Sacred Mushroom, which was a psychedelic band with a gal named Donna Pence.
Okay.
And Donna performed also at our Border Legends show later on in the years when we started doing the Border Legends.
Is this the picture over here?
No, that's my band called the Sounds Royale. That's the band that when we left El Paso in 1973. I had graduated from UTEP in 72, and my wife said, you know, I'll marry you once you graduate. Well, I graduated in 72, and then in 73, the four guys you see standing there, and myself, you know, 3 guys and myself, and then Debbie, we were the house band out at the Red Flame. It was a band called Macadamia.
Okay.
And Skip Flager, who owned the club, we were losing our keyboard player, you know, from Macadamia. He was going to join West Wind, another local band, and you know, he didn't want to go on the road with us. We wanted to go on the road just to see what it'd be like and see if we could do, you know, like a lot of bands did. They'd head out to L.A. and try to hit the big time. So that's exactly what we did. We left El Paso in 73, and we got out there. Well, let me back up a little bit here. Skip Flager, the owner of the club, knew a guy, a keyboard player, because we needed to add one.
Sure.
And so he said, well, I know this guy, Ted McKeever, out in Newport Beach, California. And so we called Ted, and he said, yeah, I'm open right now. I'm not playing with anybody. He came to El Paso with his organ and, his B3 organ. And I think we auditioned for him. I don't think he auditioned for us. He was that good.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's take a break there real quick and continue on this story. Again, joining us here in studio right now is Rick Kern, who, of course, has had a lot of experience in and around this, but you can find him probably, I'd say, more constantly these days, or at the very least on demand. In any case, over with the Talk and Rock Radio podcast, which we have, of course, mentioned previously most weeks on this show, but talking more about kind of what goes into that and kind of the stuff that you're even putting out now. But got to take that first break of this hour right now, so stay tuned for more on the El Paso History Radio Show after this break on News Radio 690 KTSM.
You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show, streaming on Facebook, where you can find archive radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Given-Baney, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archive pictures and videos of El Paso history, Remember in El Paso When on Facebook.
But again, joining us here in studio is Rick Kern, host of the Talkin' Rock Radio podcast, partner program for us here on this show as well. And speaking of some of those remembrances, of course, it would almost be remiss to be mentioning all of this music and the differences in it and not play a little bit of it. But given modernity and the way that we display the show, among other things, our on-air audience is going to be able to hear this, but we're going to have to end up muting this for at least part of our online audience, rights and all being what they are. So at that point in time, I mean, you're mentioning how this was so different. I mean, this is what top 40 was back in the day here. It's very different than it is nowadays. So, I mean, what other kind of stuff were you listening to around this point in time when you first heard them live, like you said, at 13 in 1963?
Well, this band was so phenomenal, and this song, of course, it was not written by them. It was written by Sonny Curtis from the Crickets, but I think it was the Bobby Fuller Four pretty much that put it on the map. It really became their song, and several other bands like the Clash and all did their versions of it.
Oh yeah,
but it was a unique song and just perfect for the time. They did a lot of their own stuff, but
sure.
this is the one that really put them on the map.
Absolutely. And the one that is, again, versions of it and their cover, as well as other covers, certainly still around, still very much present. And I feel like you can see it in an ad or two every so often, even these days, or at least in other productions. So, of course, that's what kind of set you on this. But then you're continued, as we kind of left off, where you're recounting it of your work and your band that was...
that was the Sounds Royale band.
Oh, the Sounds Royale.
Yeah,
okay.
The Sounds Royale. We... after we auditioned Ted, the keyboard player,
right.
It was a perfect fit, and we decided, well, let's go on the road. So my wife and I took all of our stuff and put it in Beacon's Moving and Storage, and what she thought would probably be only maybe about a 3 or 4 month, leave from El Paso to L.A. ended up being almost 6 years, but we got out to Newport Beach and. Basically moved into Ted's parents' house. All the kids were already married and gone, so they had this huge house in Newport Beach.
Oh, okay.
It was great for us. We got to stay there, and they loved our music. It was a very musical family anyway. But we set up all of our equipment in the living room there at their house at 1507 Dorothy Lane. I still remember it. It was a quarter mile from where John Wayne lived, right there off of Balboa Island there in Newport Beach, and it was so great. We would practice in their living room, and then we got Debbie Wilson to come in and start singing with us. That was the girl we added to the group, so it was 4 guys and a girl, and that was the Sounds Royale show. In that group, we had a nice little run. We did places like the Disneyland Hotel, the Newport Inn, Del Webb's Townhouse, the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco. We grand opened a club in Huntington Beach called Charlie Brown's.
Okay.
And that was a dinner club. We were the very first band to play there. And that was a great time. We did shows that encompassed everything from the 4 Freshmen to the High-Lows to Tommy. I mean, the rock opera.
Oh yeah,
Tommy,
of course.
Tommy. And we did lots of medleys. Everything that we did was pretty much in 4 and 5 part harmony. It was really a nice group, and that group was together for about 5 or 6 months, and then there was a problem with the keyboard player and his wife. They weren't totally getting along and all of that.
Okay.
So that kind of
the kind of stuff that happens in band drama.
It happens in bands, a lot of drama there. So that basically caused the band to break up. So I put my name out there and picture and everything at the union. Of course, out there those days you had to be a union, musician union member, and to play the rooms we were playing. So I went and posted my picture up along with a request of a singing drummer looking for for a band to join, because I didn't want to call it quits and just come back to El Paso. I wanted to try to still give this a shot.
All you're talking about there happening in 6 months, you said?
Well, yeah, that's how long we lasted out there, with that group, with the Sounds Royale.
With that group. And again, more groups to be mentioned here, but we got to take that next break already. Again, joining us here in studio is Rick Kern, and now, of course, host and producer, everything for the Talk and Rock Radio podcast. But talking more about these remembrances and his experience after this break. So stay tuned for more on the El Paso History Radio Show here on News Radio 690 KTSM. Joined here in studio right now, we do have Rick Kern, host of the Talk and Rock Radio podcast, and everything that comes with that. So where we left off in kind of your personal journey in relation to this music, after having you kind of met the Bobby Fuller for initially, and then after some of the passing away of the notable figures, including on there the kind of reconstitution of bands, including some of them, found yourself making a go of it out in L.A. And you were now having put yourself back out there after the initial breakup of the band you went out there with, as happens. Not quite a Yoko Ono type situation, but you can see it from here. You then kind of put yourself out in a different way and then end up reconstituting into another group, right?
Exactly. And so I get the phone call from these guys that saw my post at the Union that said, we're a couple of guys that are looking for a drummer, a singing drummer. And so I basically get in my car with my drums and go up to this guy's house in Westminster, California, and audition with these guys. Go in the living room, set up my drums, and they were all set up with their amps and everything. And so we start singing, and next thing you know, our voices really sound good together. So we thought, well, this could work. And so we form a group called Tapestry. And Tapestry, we rehearsed for, I think we had 2 weeks of rehearsal. And the agent that I knew, Doris Vance, I gave her a call in Beverly Hills there. She was with the Howard King Agency, and we talked, and I said, come check out our group, Doris, see what you think. Well, she did, and she said, you guys are ready to start being booked. So soon after that, I get the phone call from her, and it kind of went like this. I called my wife, and I said, sweetheart, can we be packed up and ready to go to Lake Tahoe tonight? She said, oh, what? Where are you going? I said, we're going to open at the Sahara and Lake Tahoe, and we're going to be there for 1 week. There was, I guess, a cancellation due to an illness or something of a band, so they pulled us in. And so going up to Lake Tahoe, my wife, we bought a bunch of clothes, and my wife's putting all these studs on, to make them all shiny and sparkly and everything.
Of course.
So we'd look like a band. And so we got the outfits ready to go. We get there, pull in, and on the billboard is Elvis Presley. And, and while we're there, to be there 1 week, ended up being 6 weeks. They liked us so well, They held us over. So that was a great thing. We had a great experience there. We met a band across the street called Command Performance, which really became kind of our mentor band. We love this group, and I can go on and on and on about that, and I won't on this show, but
you have, though, on your podcast as well.
Yeah, I have. And yes, and in the future of this band, we traveled all over the United States and Canada. We did 3 tours of Canada. We covered just about every state of the United States, except for about 6, I think, the New England states. But we traveled all over the country, playing local show rooms all over the country. We appeared with Pete Barbuti, the comedian, Jackie Vernon, the comedian. We just did a lot of fun things working showrooms. And the difference between, when I say showrooms, this is a kind of thing where you don't just go and dance in a club and hear music. This is actually putting on a show. Okay. We would do comedy skits. We would do, a lot of tight harmonies, lots of medleys, like we did a Carpenters medley. We did a Broadway medley. Okay. We did, just all kinds of an oldies medley where we would impersonate the Mills Brothers and then turn right around and do the Andrews Sisters. I mean, this is what our voices would allow us to do. We could sing low notes, but we could sing high notes also. So I did Frankie Valli, on one of our songs. I did, Sherry. So that it was a very interesting group. That group lasted for about 3.5, 4 years. And then we ended up going back to LA. And a couple of guys, I gave Jerry Johnson, a friend of mine, a call, and I said, "Hey, Jerry, you want to come play bass with our band? I'm coming back to LA with Dan Evans, and Kurt's going to be going a different direction with his keyboard work and jazz and stuff." And he said, "Well, I got another guitar player that I can pull in." So we formed Tapestry 2. And that was my very last band on the road. We got off the road in 1978, and my wife and I came back to El Paso. But that group had a nice run. We had an opportunity to maybe do some work with Dick Clark, and be on a national TV show with Captain and Tennille. None of the networks picked it up, but that was kind of the nature of the business. One door halfway opens and you're starting to step through it, and it shuts in your face. So
that's show business.
That's showbiz. None of the networks bought the package, but it was a nice group, and I still stay in touch with the guys. In fact, there's going to be a reunion this month in Las Vegas of this band. I'm going to try to make it. I'm not sure if I can yet, but we're going to try to get together, the four of us, and have about 3 or 4 days together, reuniting from the old days.
Absolutely. And so those, again, kind of remembrances are then what you then took forward, including into the, again, within the last, I guess, decade and a half now at this point here, because he ended up starting a music blog site on this, kind of focus on these remembrances and the relationships that you still kind of kept up to that day until now, even in a lot of cases, right?
Exactly. When I got back here in 78, and then I got an 8-to-5 job and, joined corporate America, and it was in about 2007. I was getting very melancholy. I was thinking about my old bandmates and my musician friends from El Paso days and everything. And so I started getting in contact with them, and I thought, I saw a blog called Orange County Then and Now. And I thought, why don't I do something like that and call it, Musicians of El Paso, Past and Present. And I did. So I formed this thing in 2007. There it is. That's our splash page that my son designed for us for my blog, and started that thing. And about 400 posts later, I got hold of a lot of musicians, called them and said, can I share your stories? Can I share some of your music on this site? And all that. Next thing you know, I had people calling me, musicians, saying, "Hey, I'd like to hook up with, this guy again, and hey, do you know where Bert Peters is?" And hey, and so next thing you know, I'm kind of in the middle here of bringing people back together. And I thought, well, this is kind of cool. This is kind of why I was doing this, was to keep the memories alive and everything with this blog site, with all these bands that I grew up with and musicians that I cared a lot about, the Henchmen and Rod Crosby and, Bobby Rosales from Bobby and the Premiers, and all these memories and thoughts are coming back to me, about all the old bands, all the old clubs that we had in El Paso back in the day, and I was laying in bed this morning thinking about all the different clubs that we used to have where people could go and hear bands play, and that's kind of what this blog site was all about, was connecting with these bands and talking about some of the old clubs where they played and everything, and it was pretty neat. That was in 2007, and then it kind of morphed from there. But I think the big thing there was that we had a lot of people that wanted to stay in touch with each other, and I really enjoyed getting the stories and putting their pictures up and bringing back a lot of the old memories.
Absolutely. And so again, a couple of pretty obvious through lines can be drawn from then some of your other activities and even what you're doing again now. Again, if you're just joining us, guest right now is Rick Kern, host of the now music podcast Talkin' Rock Radio. We're talking more about that and how we kind of got there, as along with these remembrances and performances that were available around town. So stay tuned for more on the El Paso History Radio Show after this quick break here on News Radio 690 KTSM. This is usually the spot where we would also talk about some of our other great partners in promoting El Paso history and parts of it, including Talkin' Rock Radio. But of course, we have sitting with us here in the studio right now, Rick Kern, the host of the program, as we are recounting both some of the work that you've done, the remembrances that you host over on the page page as well as your personal history involved in this. So people haven't checked that out already, which they definitely should. They may have also most recently seen some of your story, at least part of what we've recounted here in print here. You did have cover and article set that came out in a recent dish, like within the third, fourth quarter of last year in City Beat magazine, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they had contacted me and said, "Would you write an article for this magazine that we do?" And so I said, "Yeah, I'll put something together." So I called it "Once Upon a Dream." And when I was giving you the story a little while ago, I actually left the dream part out. That was my that night when my dad asked me, "Well, how'd you like the band?" And when I went to bed that night, I dreamed about this band, and so I in that dream, I wanted so much to be in a band like this, and we got pretty close to it. Our band, the Basic Sound. Of course, we had the lead guitar player Jim Reese in that band. So we played, I Fought the Law. We played, quite a bit of the Bobby Fuller music, and but we played a wide variety of all kinds of music. We were doing covers. We didn't do any originals. We did all covers and mostly dance music there at the Knights Club where we were playing. But that band also morphed into some other big things happened for us. We would pull in other musicians depending on the venue that we were playing. Like we got contracted to play for the El Paso Police Department and we played at the Coliseum. And so we pulled in a guy named Jeff Lynne, who can be remembered as being a lot like Tom Jones. He's a really amazing singer. He lives over in Kentucky with his wife now, but he was part of our Basic Sound group. We would feature him on some shows. We had a sax player named Horst Klauser, and he would pull him in. We had a guy on trumpet named Joe Alvarez. So we do a lot of Tijuana brass and stuff with Joe and some of the Mexican songs, and we would do some cumbias, and different Latin rhythms and things that we would do. We tried to do it all. We played it all.
So not just rock and roll, as was definitely popular. Again, top 40 was pretty much dominated by that at that point in time, but also what was regionally popular, as you were a lot focused on. I mean, before you made the whole trek out to LA and made that jaunt with it, focused on, what was popular and what was being played around here.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's amazing how many clubs back in the 60s, Andrew, that we had in El Paso in the 60s, 70s. We had the Knights Club, which was the Roadway Inn at Bassett, and we had the Jet Set out on Dyer. We had the Ramada Inn right up there off of, by what used to be called the OA. They say go buzz the OA right there at Bassett Center up on Montana. We had the Lariat Club. We had the Black Garter. We had the Caravan. We had Johnny Fairchild's Key Club, and of course, back in the 60s, we had, Bobby Fuller had his own club out off of Hondo Pass in Northeast called the Rendezvous. And of course, that's where they played a lot. And it was just great times. We had the Red Flame. We had Tom Bell's, which was a club out on off of Dyer where they would have country bands. We had the Red Barn, which was another country band place. My parents would go out there and cut a rug on the weekends. Go out there and dance. Country music. We had the Green Frog. We had the Golden Gate downtown. My band played there a couple of times. The International Club was owned by Ron and Sue Gordon of the Sojourners. And we'd go and watch them play when we weren't playing ourselves. And of course, there was a period of time there for about 3 years where I was working 6 nights a week while I was going to college, so I didn't get to go and hear a lot of the bands. But many of these groups I did hear, like the Henchmen. They played some of my Isleta High School after game dances. The Pawns, the Instigators, the Infants of Soul. There was a great place out on Pershing called the KK Club, and that was usually had some of the better Hispanic bands that were playing there. Like Bobby and the Premiers that I mentioned earlier. We had the Continental Club. We had the Treetop Lounge, which would bring in out-of-town acts like the Ventures. I saw and Vince Vance and the Valiants. I saw both of those bands there at the Treetop Lounge. And so it wasn't just local bands. They would bring in some pretty hot acts from out of El Paso too. That was always fun to go see.
Absolutely. So we'll talk more about these remembrances and then how you kind of started encapsulating them more, including in performances people could see. Again, joining us here right now, Rick Kern, again, host of the Talkin' Rock Radio podcast. We got to take that end of the hour break right now, but coming out of this, getting into hour 2 of the program with more on the El Paso History Radio Show here on News Radio 690 KTSN. Stay tuned. Still, again, joining us here in studio right now is, of course, Rick Kern, host of the music podcast and the different parts of history, both personal and regional, as we were kind of breaking down some of the locations that were in town that people may remember. Talkin' Rock Radio, that's some of what you focus on there, at least, flavor of it, but you'd also do a lot of other production stuff with the Talkin' Rock Radio. But as we got onto the kind of path that led us to where we are now when it comes from this, you did have a previous blog site, the Musicians of El Paso blog, and that kind of went from, I guess, cyberspace back into real space around the kind of the end of, I guess, 2 decades ago now, 2009, give or take, right?
Exactly. All that reuniting of bands and everything, my wife said, you pulling all these great memories and bands together, why don't you think about doing a show, put some groups together and do a show. So in 2009, I had approached Rod Crosby to do one with me and let's give it a shot, and basically that was inspired somewhat by, Zoomer Roberts and Donna Pence had done a year before that, 2008, at Big Al's. They had done a jam. And it involved a lot of the, it was a reunion for Urban High School. And they brought in a bunch of musicians that had played back in those days and everything during, like we talked about, the Bobby Fuller music and all that. And of course, Rod Crosby, he was always known for that, doing Bobby Fuller and Buddy Holly. Those were his big 2 major groups that he loved to play the music of.
Okay.
And so that was such a great success, that little jam. And I thought, well, that's kind of like what I want to do with this, only I want to do it more structured. I wanted to make it like a real concert.
Okay.
With the bands of the past. And so I approached Rod and I said, would you be interested in doing this with me? Let's take this journey together. And he did. He jumped right in the middle of it with me. He was in charge of the back line and, all the sound, front of the house, stage, all the lighting, all of that. So he took care of that. And then I took care of the bands and the promotions. Mm-hmm. And did lots of shows with your dad and Melissa here, on the Leon Met show and the El Paso History Radio Show, helping us promote. In fact, there's a picture of Howard Steele there, record producer, we call him the master. And he's quite a guy. He's done a lot himself, in record production and produced some big names out there. In fact, the band Toto was founded in his studio there in L.A. He was partnered with Richard Perry. But anyway, he would always come in and help us with the sound in our shows with Rod, and loved our shows. So we took the journey starting in 2009 with Border Legends. The first place that we did it was Lancers East out there on the east side of town. And there's a picture of the stage. It was very small. We had maybe about 200-300 people in there. When we'd occupy the whole Lancers Club. And then after that, the second year, we had such great success with that. The audience says, please keep doing this. This was so great. And I guess we knew we were doing the right thing when I looked out in the audience and saw, and I'm not going to mention his name, but he'll know who it is whenever he sees the show. But the guy was literally tearing up. He had tears coming down his face because he loved the band that was up there and what they were doing and bringing back the memories. And these bands were so iconic in El Paso. I mean, we had, just to name a few here, my very first Border Legend that we had a gal by the name of Karen Taylor Good, who came back to El Paso from Nashville. She still lives in Nashville. She's a big time record producer for her own label, her own music, and she agreed to come in and be our MC for that show. And she did about 4 or 5 of her own songs and did a great job doing the MC position and sharing her story and going to Coronado High School and actually a guitar player, Sam Stevenson, that was in my band when we first left El Paso, he had partnered up with her and did one of her songs called "A Mile from Home," I think was the name of it.
Okay.
And they did just a great job as a duet together in that show. But anyway, it was a great success that first year, and the audience really wanted to see it, happen again. So the next year, we went to a little bigger place called Isodone Hall out by Country Club.
Okay.
And on that one, I brought in Randy Fuller from the Bobby Fuller Four, and it was a lot of fun because I did the backing vocals with that group along with Jay Nye from the Wild Ones. We had Paul Dillon on guitar, Rod Crosby playing lead guitar. We had Randy Fuller on bass, Dalton Powell and Dwayne Quirico, both drummers for the Bobby Fuller Four, were both there playing on the same stage that night. So it was magical. It was really a great show, great night. And so the next year, we're back at Lancers again and out on the east side. And then after that, it started growing bigger and bigger. And we ended up going to the El Maida Shrine Temple up on Alabama. And there's a picture of the hall there when we first started using that facility in 2009, 10, 11. That was 12, 13, 14, 15. That was 2012 when we first started using the El Maida Shrine. And we stayed there for the following, all the way to 2016. That was our number 8 in 2016, doing the Border Legends show.
Right, and of course, the bigger production, the bigger area there. I mean, the shrine is very well set up to take large crowds there, so it makes a lot of sense there. And of course, you had to slip in the picture there of did some of the production there for you in some of the final few years of the kind of back end, the video production of it, because you also then put it out on portable media that people could also enjoy later on, even if that was a beast to produce on its own, right?
Oh gosh, it was. That was we did one DVD. And produced the whole show on it, and it was quite a challenge. But yeah, you definitely helped us out there with the camera work, and we really appreciate that. We had some great MCs there at that show. Besides some wonderful bands, one of them being the great Sonny Melendres. He's right there in the middle with Sergeant Preston and your dad, and some great memories. Sonny came in and actually emceed our show a couple of times. He lives in San Antonio now, has his own nationally syndicated radio shows. He's got his own podcast going and very successful. He's been inducted into Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The guy's amazing, a dear friend. And I have to say, he dated my wife before I even knew her.
Okay.
But he's a neat guy. We do stay in touch, and I've done a couple of podcast episodes with him. He actually I did one show with him, and then soon after that we did another one with Pete Heinlein and Johnny Thompson and Sonny and myself, and that was a lot of fun. Doing a podcast with those guys, and I had to bleep out some of the stories.
Okay, I can imagine.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun, but yeah, we, here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So putting on the Border Legends, and you had a lot of different, it kind of a full flavor, the entire kind of point behind them, besides coming out of course, the blogs and your own personal remembrances, is kind of like you were reading off about those previous performance spaces that existed, the different clubs that existed in town, is kind of what the scene was like at that kind of point in time for, well, essentially people of a certain age.
Exactly. Well, and one thing I didn't mention yet was over in Juarez, around that same time, in Juarez, we had some wonderful places to go and see entertainment. We had the lobby where Long John Hunter was playing. We had the La Fiesta, where, Frank Sinatra, Earl Grant, Nat King Cole, my parents used to go over there and see these great shows, and we had, a lot of fun places. I mean, you go to the Kentucky Club and watch
Sure.
the marimba players play and get a good meal. And, times just really changed. I mean, and here in El Paso, of course, I've already mentioned a lot of the clubs, but, we had the Free Holy in the Upper Valley, and I mean, Rick Nelson and the Stone Canyon Band played there. We were on the road when that happened, so I didn't get to see that show, but a lot of, famous people came through and played that room, and we had the Caravan East, we had so many different clubs in El Paso. And then we had the folk music thing that was going on also. So we had the Sugar Shack in different places in El Paso, 2 or 3 other places where, folk music was going on, So, it was pretty amazing, very diverse, lots of different kinds of music. You had surf music, we had all kinds of music happening between the 60s and 70s.
Absolutely. And again, a lot of that goes into what you're still putting on now with the Talk and Rock Radio podcast. We'll get into how that came about a little bit more here in just a bit, but let's go ahead and take that next break right now. Again, joining us here in studio is Rick Kern, of course, host of the Talk and Rock Radio podcast, and we're a previous producer of the Border Legends Tour, all the things we've talked about so far. But stay tuned for more of these remembrances and what happens now here on the El Paso History Radio Show on News Radio 690 KTSM. Again, joining us here in studio right now, we do have a Rick Kern, host of the Talk and Rock Radio podcast, and very involved in many different ways and in different eras over recent-ish history when it comes to music production, kind of from the, rock and roll era on, though tons of other kinds of music that you've mentioned there as well.
Exactly. We were talking about the Border Legends, and that show was always geared primarily, Andrew, to the rock and roll bands of El Paso. But in the El Paso scene, back in the 60s and 70s, we had, and I mentioned a lot of the groups, played in the different, clubs of El Paso.
Sure.
Some of them that I've named already, but there were some that I haven't talked about. Like there was one out here off of Mesa. I never went to it. It was called the Yellow Submarine.
Wonder what they played. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder. And the Cotton Patch was another place where a lot of local bands played. A good friend of mine, Ron Stone, had a band called Southwest.
Okay.
And Patty Tiscareño was a part of that group.
Of course.
And they played the Cotton Patch, a great place. I mentioned the Treetop Lounge already, but they had a lot of local bands that played there as well, not just the Benchers and Vince Vance that I saw there. It was a great place to go. The Top of the Inn downtown at the Holiday Inn.
Okay.
That was another good place that we would play on the weekends up there. The Downtowner was another place downtown. That was a good club to play. The International Club, the Sheraton Executive Inn, Free Holy. We've talked about the Sugar Shack. That was for folk music.
Sure.
The Bolero Lounge out on Dyer, not just the Sky Lanes, but they also had a lounge there. I never played that room. I don't even think I ever went in there, but they did have a place for bands to play there as well. One of the real dominant places of El Paso for live music was Doc's Barbecue, where Springfire played for a long time, and they played other places as well. But Doc's Barbecue was owned by Doc Anthony, who played drums with the band for a brief period of time.
Okay.
And but the Springfire was El Paso's just, what can I say about those guys that hasn't been said already? We've done a show here on El Paso History Radio Show with Melissa and your dad and myself, where we brought in the Springfire group, and we had Jim Stevens in San Francisco calling in,
right? And
we actually had Jeff and Jaime and Dennis sitting right here in this chair. It's been a couple of years now, I guess, since we did that particular episode. But the guys are so much fun. You got to have thick skin with those guys because they can really get after you pretty good.
All right.
But they're a bunch of great guys, and hopefully someday we'll see a reunion from them. We do stay in touch. In fact, I'm still trying to get a podcast lined up, with them, an episode with them where we can get them all here in El Paso in front of the same camera at the same time, so we can do that. But a lot of good things happening in El Paso back in those days. We had, when we did Border Legends #2, we had one of the guys, I was just thinking about him, that was so popular. Bobby Rosales and the Premiers really did a great job at our show that night. And Eugene Anchondo, Peter Galindo, and Sonny Powell. These are three names of Hispanic band members that were iconic to El Paso and the Hispanic music of those days.
Mm-hmm.
They had Sonny and the Sunliners and all these great Hispanic bands. We didn't have a whole lot of Hispanic rock and roll bands to put in the Border Legends that we would have liked to have, because quite frankly, they weren't playing anymore. They weren't together, and I lost contact with a lot of these guys. A lot of them left El Paso, some of them passed away and all that. But that show, #2, 2010, at 2011, we had those guys that I just mentioned, along with Bobby Rosales, and in that show we had the Henchmen, we had Truth, Zoomer Roberts, who was incredible. That night he was always fun to watch, and Marshall Nelson came in from California. We had the Adams brothers, Doug and Daryl Adams, got up there and did their thing with Andre Bonaguidi and Doug Neal. They were great. Rod Crosby and the Intruders, can't say enough about Rod. He was so iconic. I did an episode with Rod, and then he passed away not too long after that. But anyway, we have a lot of good memories, my friend. A lot of good memories.
Absolutely. And so as we talk about the podcast and transition into that, we'll have to talk more about that again after this next break here. So again, Rick Kern, host of the Talkin' Rock Radio podcast, joining us here in studio here. We've got to take that break, but after this, we'll be back with more on the El Paso History Radio Show on News Radio 690 KTSM. But again, joining us here in studio right now, we of course have Rick Kern, host of the Talkin' Rock Radio podcast, which we do mention frequently enough on this program because you're talking about different aspects of history, but not even just the history part of it. That's kind of what it came out of for you, but it's morphed a lot and a lot of different focuses that you kind of encapsulate there.
Exactly right. We've got great history and a lot of things that have happened through the years, and that was kind of what brought this all about with Talkin' Rock Radio. My wife said, you got all this good information and everything. Why don't you think about doing your own show? And of course, I'd had a little bit of practice working with you all over here, and
sure.
And so that was always fun. I thought, well, let's give it a shot. So COVID, when it came to El Paso, it kind of brought a lot of people a lot of bad situations, with their businesses and all that, myself included. But so I had some time on my hand and went ahead and converted my office at home to a studio and bought some equipment and here we go. We're on our second year now doing this show, and it's been a nice run. We're trying to do it once a week. I've had a little bit of time there where I had a little bit of a lull because of the holidays and trying to get the people that I had scheduled and everything with their opportunities to be on my show and everything. So you always have to deal with that. But
sure. But let's actually back up for a second here, because we kind of left it before we went to that break was with the Border Legends tour still going on. And essentially, I mean, one of the last ones, I don't want to say that I cursed her or anything, but I happened to be involved in the last of the couple ones there. And then you ended up having to go on a hiatus, essentially, from the live performance aspect, not immediately before the pandemic, but like 2016, 2017, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we had to basically we did 8 Border Legends, and it was a great run. I mean, we had a lot of fun with it. We had some amazing people there that played it. And when the word got out, I mean, like right there's Peggy Sue, the actual Peggy Sue of Buddy Holly's Peggy Sue.
Mm-hmm.
She came in from Lubbock to see our show and to sell her book here. And there's Rod singing Peggy Sue to Peggy Sue. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Mm-hmm.
And and she said that was really a highlight moment of her life. She said it was so good, and she really appreciated the crowd and what we were doing and memorializing and remembering Buddy Holly. You know, of course, Rod lived for that. He loved Buddy Holly. He loved Bobby Fuller, and he always played the music as good as anybody ever could. You know, he was a real he was a great one, and part of the reasoning why Border Legends came to an end, Andrew, to be honest with you, is that we didn't really run out of steam. We still had plenty of steam to keep it going, but we had issues with the venue. Things change up there politically. You know, we had some. It was a perfect place for us to do our show because we had a big hall. It was indoors. We had good rooms. We had a green room in the back for the bands to be able to, you know, kind of just hang and eat.
Speaking of the Elmida Shrine up there off of
Alabama.
Is it Alabama? Okay, I just forget which actual street it's on there. Been there recently enough. I mean, that's a very good space for a lot of different things. They host a lot of different things there. But if some of the back end stuff stops working or stop making sense, or there's become other logistical issues that can affect the continuation of I mean, it's a major production. Having been literally in the midst of it when it came to the production of it, so that's the back of my head as I'm monitoring the camera. But the real thing I want to focus on in this shot is all the boards there. And I'm not quite sure if Rod is in that picture, but he may not be right immediately there, but he could be there because he was often, when he wasn't on stage during these performances, the little pen light in his hand, constantly adjusting levels. I mean, he was a maestro with this. And the fact that he wasn't like catching fire just because of the friction and the fast movement he was doing always kind of was a miracle to me, because he was very, but hands-on would be an understatement. And so in the doing on the work on this, I mean, it was a lot. And he was constantly adjusting things, constantly uttering condemnations of equipment that would make a sailor blush, those kind of things here. So it was quite the sight to behold. That was not the performance everyone else was watching, but was right in front of me during those last few years.
I tell you, nobody could do it like Rod. You know, he was just a genius when it came to front of the house sound. I mean, he lived for it. I mean, he owned the company where he would rent out equipment and everything, and he was just a phenom. You know, he just really was. When we started that show up there, we would go literally take a whole week, you know, to set it all up. I mean, to do the back line and everything. It was a major deal, and we had a lot of people that helped out. You know, band members from other bands and stuff would come in and help us do the load in, and we'd have as many as 15, 20 people there taking stuff off his trucks. I mean, and it was like a well tuned, you know, guitar. I was going to say well-tuned clock or whatever, but it, you know, well-tuned clock, you know, well-wound clock. But anyway, he
definitely wound tightly. I'll say that.
wound tightly. But yeah, we would get it all set up, and I mean, but not just set up. It had to be perfect. You know, it had to be just right. The lighting had to be just right. We had to get all the, you know, pipe and draping up, and the sponsors. You know, we had to get their stuff set up, and Sergio Lewis and all these great people that helped us out through the years. You know, we wanted to, you know, to be there for them, and they wanted to help us out too, and so that's what made it happen. You know, it was a good run. You know, we figured out the last show that we did there, Andrew, we had over 25 different states in the country flew into El Paso to go to our show. I mean, it was the word was out, and people always loved coming here, and it was like a big high school reunion, only we had all the high schools in one place.
Yeah, all the bands, all the high schools, all the things were playing at that point in time. So, of course, ended that performance after 2016, and then, of course, you know, the pandemic restrictions, all that changed things. There were some initial plans to resurrect it, but unfortunately, you know, Rod passed away.
Yeah, you know, it was just a total surprise. You know, I had been after Rod to do an episode with me on my Talkin' Rock radio show, and he was so busy doing a lot of a lot of contract work and everything for people that needed his audio services and
Sure.
whatnot. And so it was taking a while. It probably 5 or 6 months, and finally we got him scheduled to do a show with me, and so we did it. And it wasn't very long after that that we lost him, you know. But I'm so blessed to have been able to work with him
Mm-hmm.
for as long as I did, and not just from a standpoint of Border Legends, but knowing him as long as I did from '69 till now, you know. And
Yeah.
we have great memories together, and he's dearly missed. But we moved ahead into this Talkin' Rock radio
Right.
show, and it's been quite a fun experience. You know, I originally started out this show to keep the memories alive of the local bands,
Mm-hmm.
and we've done a lot of shows with them. You know, I've got my very first show, because it's all part of the inspiration of my getting into the music business, and that was here in the Bobby Fuller 4. So I thought it only be appropriate to have my very first episode with the legendary Dalton Powell,
Mm-hmm.
the drummer for the Bobby Fuller 4, and he's one of my dearest friends. And so he agreed to go ahead and do my first episode, and so we had a good time with that show. And second show after that was Terry Manning, another great musician of El Paso. Went to Austin High School, and of course we've had him on, you know, the El Paso History Radio Show before with myself, talking about his history, and he's just incredible. You know what all he's done. I've done one with Karen Taylor Good, who was the MC of our Border Legends first one, as we talked about.
Right.
Did one with Sonny Melendres out of his studio there in San Antonio, and I think one of the coolest ones that I've done was with Mike Stone. Mike Stone's not a musician. Mike Stone was the gentleman that Priscilla Presley left Elvis for. Okay.
Okay.
And he lives in the Philippines. And Mike, of course, the hour change over there is kind of weird. You know, it's like 13, 14 hours.
Yeah, that's a logistical interesting thing. Yeah.
That we had to really toggle the time clock on that one, man.
Yeah.
What time was going to work best for him and me and all that. But we finally made it work. And Mike was great. He was Phil Spector's bodyguard. I mean, this guy's an amazing guy. He's done a lot of the Bruce Lee type movies. He's a karate master. The guy's a 10th degree black belt, which is amazing in itself, you know. But he talks all about the spiritual part of karate, and all about
Interesting.
Yeah, a very interesting show.
So all these parts you're putting together, then, I mean, of course you have, I mean, some of your episodes that people can find over on talkinrockradio.com. You also get into, say, what was the ones I was just looking at, you know, El Paso rock and roll history, El Paso rock band history part 1 and 2 on the ones that you had come out a little bit earlier in 2022. But then, of course, you got new production coming out for 2023 there as well, starting January 19th this year and going on strong already. And so it's not even just El Paso and kind of the locally based band history, but a lot of other things, including some stuff you've been doing. Your most recent one actually there with Denny Tedesco. Yeah,
that one came out this Thursday. Denny Tedesco is amazing. He was the producer director of The Wrecking Crew, and I'm sure a lot of people out there have seen that. It's a great piece of work. But he did that documentary, and then his most recent one is called Immediate Family, which is kind of a continuation of Wrecking Crew. Wrecking Crew, they went away in the I'm going to say late 70s, early 80s. And when I say went away, this was the band. These were the musicians that were behind big names like the Beach Boys and on and on and on. And Denny Tedesco was the son of the great Tommy Tedesco, guitar player. And when our last band was together out in L.A., we went to a place called Dick Grove's Music Workshop. It's like a music conservatory.
Mm-hmm.
We were all studying there, and I was working with people like Louis Bellson and Ed Shaughnessy from the Tonight Show band, and Richie Lepore and Paul Humphreys from Lawrence Welk's band. These are the drummers that I got to work with, and they would do clinics and things, and we would actually get up and play with them and stuff. It was a great experience, and in the other room were my guitar players and bass player who were studying with the great Tommy Tedesco and Lee Ritenour and big names like that. These were the session players that were just phenomenal players, and they were the musicians behind the big names. Well, this latest show that Denny has produced, it's called Immediate Family, and these guys are amazing. You've got Leland Sklar on bass.
Mm-hmm.
You got Russ Kunkel on drums. You got Steve Postel on guitar. You got Danny Korchmar on guitar. These guys are incredible musicians. They are the musicians that backed up, oh my goodness, James Taylor, Carole King, on and on and on. The list goes on and on and on about these guys.
I mean, yeah, we're basically talking about essentially professional musicians who were not part of any, they may have been in their own bands, but that wasn't the major part of their profession. We're talking about here is that they were someone's coming in to record, they need a live band, they need something backing them. Okay, we're the professionals who will be there providing that to them. So odds are, anyone, even if they're not aware of this concept at all, if they've listened to music, they've heard these guys and their performances because they've been immortalized in recordings of, again, some of the most popular and famous people that you've heard about in musical history over years. And so that's some of the stuff and the kind of thing you talk about on Talkin' Rock Radio. Again, the most recent one there with Danny Tedesco.
Yeah, and back to Denny Tedesco, this Immediate Family, that show that will be out probably mid-year. We're looking at June probably. They're already showing it at festivals right now, film festivals. But this band, talking about that, they were the band that backed up Carole King and James Taylor. But what was unique about this band is that not only did they back them up in the studios, but they went on tour with them. They did
go on tour with them in this case.
So they toured, and they were there. And see, that was different from the Wrecking Crew days. On the Wrecking Crew days, those bands, they would stay in Hollywood in the studios,
sure,
working there at with the artists, and then they would have their own bands that would take off with them and go do the tours. But that's what's unique about the Immediate Family, and that I can't wait to see the movie. I've already seen some trailers from it that Denny sent me.
And you got some clips of that both on the online and then the podcast version of, again, Talkin' Rock Radio. But tell you what, we got to take that last break right now. Coming out of this, we'll close out the show, again, finish up here with Rick as we've been talking about it. So stay tuned for more on the El Paso History Radio Show here on News Radio 690 KTSM. So very much for having joined us here for the El Paso History Radio Show, airing in this pre-recorded episode on News Radio 690 KTSM. I've been your host, Andrew J. Polk, and of course, joining us here in studio has been Rick Kern, host of the Talkin' Rock Radio Music Podcast, that we've been going through all the various different remembrances, both of his time, his experiences, the people that you were able to see perform and then even perform alongside in later eras, as well as how that was encapsulated in things such as the Border Legends Tour. So a lot of history and a lot of things that you keep talking about there. But kind of as we're wrapping up, you're looking back on all the things you do, particularly with how these remembrances are important. I mean, we actually had a recent circumstance where some of the people you were interviewing were bandmates of some recent passages as well. Crosby, who unfortunately just passed, you were talking with like some bandmates of his.
Oh, just things that you get totally caught off guard. It's just really amazing. The recent guy that I've been talking to a lot is Leland Sklar from Immediate Family. He was just here in concert here in El Paso and with the Lovett show, and Lyle Lovett, and he's an amazing guy. He's done a lot of stuff. He does a daily podcast, and his history is phenomenal. He's played with everybody. I mean, Phil Collins, on and on and on. But we were talking about the loss of David Crosby, and it's just so you never know anymore. You just have to live each day to its fullest.
And so that's why what you're doing, particularly in cataloging that part of the history, is frankly so important, and why you're probably going to continue doing that for the foreseeable future, right?
That's what I do, man. I love keeping the history of the music industry alive. I love history in general, but I was born a musician. I think I always loved music. It's always been my first love, and I don't want to ever see it disappear. I think it's important that we preserve this for the future generations. If we don't do it, then it'll be lost, and we can't afford to have this lost. It's too important.
Absolutely not going to hear me arguing against historic preservation and encapsulating of it here. But again, joining us here in the studio has been Rick Kern, host of the Talk and Rock Radio podcast. Again, find them talkandrockradio.com. So, Rick, thank you very much for talking to us about this and all the aspects that we've covered here today.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been great.
Absolutely happy to have you on. And thank you all for joining us for the El Paso History Radio Show. Again, I've been your host, Andrew J. Polk. We'll be back next week with more on the show, and we'll be headed down to Pepe's after this one. So thank you for joining us, and have a great weekend, y'all.